The night Lowell Ashby stood at the head of their dining room table and told his wife that he wanted a divorce, he was wearing the watch she had given him for their 10th anniversary. Zinnia noticed that first. Not the folder he slapped onto the mahogany surface, not the coldness in his voice, the way he said, "This marriage is over," like he was closing a quarterly report. She noticed the watch, the one she had saved 4 months of her own salary to buy, back when she was still teaching 3rd grade, and Lowell was a mid-level analyst at Ashby Meridian Capital. Before the firm became his, before the money came, before everything changed except apparently him. Zinnia Ashby, née Zinnia Odell Crane, was 37 years old. She had spent 12 of those years as Lowell's wife, 6 of them as the quiet foundation beneath a company most people in their world assumed Lowell had built alone. She held a master's degree in nonprofit management, ran the Crane Family Foundation, named for her late mother's family, and had never once told anyone, including Lowell, what that foundation was actually connected to. Lowell Ashby was 44, managing partner of Ashby Meridian Capital, a private equity firm managing just over $3 billion in assets across real estate, healthcare infrastructure, and emerging market bonds. He was the kind of man other men admired from a careful distance, tall, composed, good in a room. He had learned how to make people feel chosen simply by paying attention to them, and Zinnia had once believed that attention was love. She understood now it was just a technique. "You need to sign these," Lowell said. He didn't sit down. He stood at the head of the table like he was chairing a meeting he had already decided the outcome of. "I've had the papers drawn up. The settlement is generous. You'll be comfortable." Zinnia looked at the folder but didn't touch it. "Comfortable," she said. "More than comfortable. The house in Potomac, a lump sum, monthly support for 3 years. My attorney said it's fair." "Your attorney," she said again. Lowell exhaled through his that sound. She had heard it 10,000 times. It meant he thought she was being slow on purpose. "Zinnia, I'm not trying to make this ugly. I'm trying to be decent about this." She finally looked up at him. "Who is she?" He didn't blink. That too was a technique. "That isn't relevant. It's relevant to me. Her name is Petra." He said it like handing over a file. "Clean, efficient. She's been a partner at the firm for 2 years. It's serious." Zinnia sat with that for a moment. 2 years. She counted backwards in her head and landed on a fundraising dinner she had organized for Ashby Meridian's charitable portfolio. A night she had spent 6 weeks planning. A room full of their friends and colleagues, Lowell standing at the podium thanking his brilliant wife. 2 years ago, right around the time Petra, whoever she was, had walked through the front door of his professional life. She stood up from the table without touching the folder. "I'll need a few days," she said. Lowell looked surprised. He had probably expected tears or arguments, or at minimum some visible crumbling. "The attorneys would like to move relatively quickly. A few days, Lowell." She walked out of the dining room, climbed the stairs, and sat on the edge of the bed they had shared for a decade. She didn't cry. She opened her phone and called one number. Her Uncle Reg answered on the second ring. Reginald Crane was 71 years old and had not been called Reginald since 1987. Everyone in the family called him by his middle name, which was Dowell. He was her mother's eldest brother, a man who wore the same brand of boots he'd been buying since 1993 and kept a horse at a small farm in central Virginia, even though he hadn't ridden in 15 years. He was also, as of that year, the chairman emeritus of Crane Meridian Holdings, a privately held financial conglomerate whose name most people in Lowell Ashby's world had never heard, because Crane Meridian Holdings did not advertise itself. It was the silent majority shareholder of Ashby Meridian Capital. "Tell me what happened," Dowell said. Zinnia told him. She kept her voice steady. She was good at that. When she finished, Dowell was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Does he know?" "No," she said. "He never knew. Do you want him to know now?" She stared at the ceiling, at the light fixture she had picked out herself at an estate sale in Georgetown, the one with the smoke-colored glass that made everything look like a photograph from a different era. "Not yet," she said. "I need to understand what he's actually done first." Because here was what Zinnia had not said at the dining room table. She had not said it because she wasn't certain yet, and she was a woman who required certainty before she said anything out loud. 3 weeks earlier, while reviewing the quarterly disbursement reports for the Crane Family Foundation, which, through a series of layered holding structures too tedious to explain at dinner parties, maintained a passive interest in Ashby Meridian Capital, she had noticed something. A vendor payment, or rather, a series of vendor payments, small enough individually that they would pass without comment, but visible in aggregate if you knew what pattern to look for. Zinnia knew what pattern to look for. She had a master's degree and 12 years of watching Lowell build a company from the inside, and she had paid attention to every single thing, even when he assumed she was simply decorating the background. The payments were going to a company called Weybridge Consulting Group. She had never heard of Weybridge. She could not find it in any directory. Its registered address was a mail facility in Delaware. 41 payments over 22 months. Totaling a number she was not prepared to say out loud yet. She had printed nothing. She had photographed the screen instead, twice from her personal phone. Then she had closed the application and called Dowell. That was 3 weeks ago. In those 3 weeks, while Lowell continued making dinner reservations and attending meetings and apparently planning to hand her a settlement folder over the dining room table, Zinnia had been doing something else entirely. She had been building a file. The woman Dowell connected her with was named Kestrel. No last name offered, none requested. Kestrel was a forensic financial analyst who operated out of a converted row house in Baltimore and had previously worked for a division of the Treasury Department that did not appear on most organizational charts. She had silver-streaked locks and a habit of drinking tea so strong it looked like motor oil, and she had been reviewing documents on behalf of the Crane family for 11 years without ever having appeared in a single public filing or news article. Kestrel looked at what Zinnia had photographed and said, simply, "Give me 2 weeks." 2 weeks later, Kestrel called back. "Weybridge Consulting Group is a shell," she said. "Incorporated in Delaware, 1 registered agent, no employees, no physical location. The payments from Ashby Meridian's general operating account are coded as advisory fees. The problem is that Weybridge is owned, through 2 additional holding layers, by a company called Forsyth Ledger LLC. And Forsyth Ledger is?" Zinnia said. "Owned by 2 individuals. One is a man named Thorne. He's a mid-level manager at Ashby Meridian who appears to have no idea what his name is attached to. Someone enrolled him without his knowledge, which means he's a cutout. And the other individual?" Kestrel paused. "Petra Galveston, 40 years old. Currently a partner at Ashby Meridian Capital, specializing in healthcare infrastructure transactions." Zinnia sat with that for a moment. "How much?" she finally said. "Across 22 months, approximately $4.6 million passed through Weybridge back to accounts controlled by Forsyth Ledger. Of that, a portion appears to have been reinvested into 3 of Ashby Meridian's own fund vehicles under Petra Galveston's management. So she was essentially laundering advisory fees through a shell company back into the fund she managed, which inflated the fund's reported performance and by extension her own compensation." Zinnia set down the mug of coffee she was holding. "Does Lowell know?" she asked. "That," Kestrel said, "is the question I cannot yet answer. Some of the payment authorizations were initiated at the managing partner level, which is Lowell. Whether he authorized them knowingly or whether those authorizations were falsified requires access to internal systems I don't have yet." "What would you need?" "Access to the authorization logs. The actual digital records, not the reports generated from them. Reports can be edited. Logs are harder." Zinnia thought about the company's internal system. She thought about the administrator credentials she had never used, the ones that had been created when Ashby Meridian was first establishing its compliance infrastructure, during a period when Zinnia had been consulting on nonprofit governance and Lowell had leaned on her to help structure the foundation's interface with the firm's reporting systems. Those credentials had never been removed. She had never mentioned them to anyone. She found out 2 days later that they still worked. She did not access anything dramatic. She didn't need to. She found the authorization logs, pulled 3 months of records, and photographed them with her personal phone, sitting at her kitchen table at 6 in the morning while Lowell slept upstairs. Then she sent the photographs to Kestrel. Kestrel called back within 48 hours. "The authorizations are real," she said, "but the digital signatures on some of them don't match Lowell's standard authentication pattern. They were submitted from his credentials, but the geolocation metadata on 4 of the submissions places them in locations where Lowell was not physically present. On 2 of those dates, Lowell was at conferences with documented attendance records. Someone used his credentials to authorize payments he didn't make." Zinnia closed her eyes. "Petra," she said. "That would be my conclusion," Kestrel said. "She had access, she had motive, and she had the technical access as a partner to operate within the system in ways that would look routine. So Lowell didn't know. It appears not, though that will need to be established formally before anyone can say it definitively." The morning Zinnia walked into the offices of Ashby Meridian Capital, she did not call ahead. She dressed the way she always dressed for professional appearances. Gray blazer, dark trousers, low heels. She wore the small diamond studs her mother had left her. She carried a leather portfolio that contained, among other things, a printed copy of the authorization log analysis Kestrel had assembled, a structural diagram of the Weybridge Forsyth network, and a letter on Crane Meridian Holdings stationery most people in this building had never seen and would not immediately recognize. The receptionist smiled. Mrs. Ashby, I didn't see you on the calendar. I'm not on it, Zinnia said pleasantly. Is my husband in? I believe he's in a meeting. That's fine. I'll wait in the conference room, the large one. She said it with a kind of quiet certainty that made people step aside without knowing why. The receptionist stepped aside. Zinnia went to the large conference room, set her portfolio on the table, and texted Dowell, I'm here. 15 minutes later, Lowell walked in, and he was not alone. Petra Galveston, 40 years old, walked in behind him. She was striking in the way certain people are when they have spent significant money and effort manufacturing an impression. She stopped when she saw Zinnia. Lowell's expression moved through surprise into something harder. Zinnia. This isn't a good time. I know, Zinnia said. Sit down, please, Zinnia Lowell. She said his name once, cleanly, and he sat. Old habit. 12 years of it. Petra remained standing by the door. You can sit too, Zinnia said, or you can stand. Either way, what I'm about to say applies to both of you. She opened the portfolio and slid the first document across the table. Weybridge Consulting Group, she said. 41 advisory fee payments over 22 months, totaling approximately $4.6 million. The money moved from Ashby Meridian's operating account through Weybridge, through Forsyth Ledger LLC, back into 3 of this firm's own fund vehicles under the management of Ms. Galveston. Petra made a sound. Not a word, just a sound. Lowell looked at the document. His face was doing something complicated. Where did you get this? That's not the relevant question right now, Zinnia said. The relevant question is whether you want to address this before the SEC does or after. I didn't authorize 4 of those authorizations carry your digital signature and your credentials, Zinnia said. But the geolocation metadata places them on days when you were at documented conferences in other cities. Someone used your login, someone who had access to your credentials and a reason to keep the payments looking routine. She watched Lowell look across the table at Petra. She watched something move across his face that she recognized. It was the same look he had worn the morning he woke up and realized the 2017 fund restructure had a flaw. The same look of a man who understood suddenly that something he had trusted had been working against him the whole time. I need you to leave, he said. He was not speaking to Zinnia. Petra's composure cracked just slightly at the edges. Lowell, whatever this woman is implying, I need you to leave the building, he said. Right now. Don't take anything from your office. You can't, just I can, he said, and I am. He said it the way a managing partner says things when the meeting is over. Petra left. The door closed behind her. Lowell sat there for a moment, looking at the documents. Zinnia, he said. I didn't know about this. I know, she said. The metadata made that clear. How long have you? About 5 weeks. He looked up, and you didn't say anything. I needed to understand what it was before I said anything. She paused. I also needed to understand what you were doing with the divorce papers before I decided what to do with what I'd found. He was quiet. If you had known about this, she said, and still handed me that folder, I would have walked this directly to the SEC and let them sort it out. Lowell set down the document. He looked like a man who had just realized the floor of the room he'd been standing in was made of something different than he thought. What do you want? He asked. Right now, I want you to call your in-house counsel, and then I want you to call an outside attorney who is not connected to Petra Galveston in any way. And then I want a full internal audit initiated by end of business today. And the divorce? We can discuss that later. This is more important. The audit took 6 weeks. Kestrel consulted off the books alongside the outside forensic team Lowell retained. What they found was not limited to the Weybridge payments. Petra Galveston had been running a secondary scheme through the Healthcare Infrastructure Fund, inflating projected returns on 2 acquisitions through vendor relationships she controlled, collecting performance fees she had not earned, and rerouting a portion of them back to herself through a third company registered in her brother's name. The total, across all schemes, was slightly over $9 million. The SEC investigation was opened formally 11 weeks after the morning Zinnia walked into that conference room. Petra Galveston's attorney attempted to negotiate a deferred prosecution arrangement. It was declined. Through all of it, certain things needed to be disclosed. Among them was the ownership structure of Ashby Meridian Capital, specifically the identity of its silent majority shareholder. It came out in a deposition Lowell gave in his attorney's office on a Tuesday afternoon in November. The examiner was a compact man with reading glasses who worked through documents methodically, without drama. He got to the section on beneficial ownership and asked Lowell to describe, to the best of his knowledge, the structure of Crane Meridian Holdings and its relationship to the firm. Lowell said, Crane Meridian Holdings is a private holding company. I've been aware of it as a passive shareholder since the firm's early restructuring. I had a very limited understanding of its internal structure. The examiner looked up. And who controls Crane Meridian Holdings? As I understand it, the Crane family. Can you identify the controlling interest holder? Lowell paused. He looked at his own attorney. Then he looked at a point somewhere between the window and the door, as if he was doing mathematics. The trustee of the controlling interest, he said slowly, is Zinnia Odell Crane Ashby. The examiner wrote something down. Your wife, my wife, Lowell said. The papers Lowell had placed on the dining room table that night were never signed. Not because Zinnia had decided to forgive him. She was still working through what she felt about the 12 years, the watch, the dinner 2 years ago, when Petra was already standing in the periphery of their life. Those were not things that resolved cleanly. But what she understood, what she had always understood, and what the events of those weeks had made undeniable, was that she had not built a quiet life. She had built a patient one. There was a difference. Dowell flew in from Virginia in December and took her to dinner at a restaurant she had loved since she was 12, a small Creole place in a part of the city that had not been renovated into something unrecognizable yet. He ordered the catfish, and she ordered the gumbo, and for a while they didn't talk about any of it. Then Dowell said, Your mother always said you were the one who would know what to do with it. Zinnia looked at him. With what? With everything she left. He moved the breadbasket to the side. She didn't trust banks, you know. Not the normal ones. She trusted people who understood what money actually was. She thought you understood. I was 22 when she died. She knew anyway, Dowell said. He picked up his fork. Mothers know. Zinnia thought about her mother. About a woman who had grown up in a row house in Baltimore, worked her way through accounting school at night, married a man named Crane who had a small insurance company and a vision, and quietly over 40 years helped build something that most people in their social circle had never heard of, because the point was never to be heard of. The point was to be real. The point was to last. The Crane Family Foundation's annual report that year included a new initiative. A legal defense fund employees who identified financial misconduct in their workplaces and faced retaliation for reporting it. Zinnia chaired the selection committee personally. The first grant went to a woman named Evie, who had worked in accounts payable at a logistics firm in Atlanta and had been fired incorrectly for raising concerns about vendor fraud. Zinnia wrote the letter accompanying the grant herself. She kept it short. What you noticed mattered. What you did with what you noticed mattered more. This is for the courage it takes to say the true thing out loud, in a room full of people who have decided the true thing is inconvenient. Petra Galveston entered a guilty plea the following spring. She was sentenced to 4 years, served in a federal facility in West Virginia, and ordered to pay restitution of $6.2 million. Thorne, the unwitting cutout, was cleared of all involvement after a brief investigation confirmed he had no knowledge of the company registered in his name. Lowell Ashby cooperated fully with the investigation. His counsel negotiated his firm's participation in a monitored compliance program. Ashby Meridian Capital did not collapse, though it contracted significantly and spent the better part of 2 years rebuilding under external oversight. Lowell was permitted to remain in an advisory role, stripped of managing partner authority, which was reorganized under a board structure in which Crane Meridian Holdings held 2 of 5 seats. He and Zinnia did eventually divorce. It was quieter than the folder on the dining room table had promised. She did not take the house in Potomac. She bought an apartment in the part of the city she had always preferred, with windows that looked out over a stretch of trees that turned copper in October, and she ate dinner at her own table most nights, which was something she had not been able to say in years. Her assistant once asked her carefully how she had known what to look for in those original documents, the vendor payments, the pattern buried in the quarterly reports. Zinnia thought about it for a moment. My mother's family was in finance, she said. She taught me that numbers don't lie. People arrange them to lie, but if you read carefully enough, the numbers tell you what actually happened. Her assistant nodded, writing something down. Also, Zinnia added, I paid attention. For 12 years, I paid attention to everything in that company, and everyone in it assumed I was just there for the dinners. She picked up her coffee. That was their mistake, not mine. The watch was in a drawer somewhere. She had stopped noticing it. That was the point.